My phone buzzed, and I hesitated before picking it up. It was a message in the family group chat, the kind that usually meant someone needed a favor or wanted to dump some family drama on me. This time, it was my dad. "Don't bother coming to Easter dinner. No one here wants to see you or your annoying kids anyway." He even threw in a laughing emoji like this was all some kind of joke. My jaw clenched, a bitter taste rising in my mouth. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it still cut deep. I'm 33, a single dad raising two amazing kids, Mia, 9, and her little brother Alex, 6. Their mom walked out on us 3 years ago, disappearing into a new life without so much as a backward glance. It was brutal, but we managed. I work long hours so I can be fully present for them when I'm home. It's a rough, beautiful chaos, but it's ours. My dad, though, he's always acted like my choice to raise my kids alone was some kind of moral failing, like I'd somehow ruined my life by stepping up. He never missed a chance to remind me that I'd failed at my marriage or that my ex leaving was somehow my fault. After reading his message, I just closed the chat, exhaling slowly. This wasn't new, just another jab. But this time something in me snapped. I'd always been the one to hold my tongue to keep the peace for the sake of the kids. Not anymore. I stood up, pacing the small living room of our apartment. Sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds, casting lines across the worn carpet. The kids were at school and the apartment felt too quiet, like the calm before a storm. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up my finances, my mind already racing with possibilities. I'd been supporting my dad and stepmom for years, letting them live rent-free in the house I bought from my late mother's estate. It was a sacrifice I'd made to keep a piece of my mom's memory alive for the family, but it had become a one-sided deal. I paid the mortgage, utilities, and taxes while they played the perfect host to family gatherings. I wasn't even welcome at anymore. Enough. I started by canceling the family phone plan. They'd been riding on my data and minutes for years, Macy, my sister, included. She's my dad's golden child, the one who can do no wrong. She's been living in the house rent-free, claiming she's finding herself while hopping from one influencer phase to the next. Next, I logged into the utilities account. With a few clicks, I set the disconnection dates for the electricity, water, and gas. I leaned back, feeling a small spark of satisfaction. It felt good to finally stop being their safety net. Then came the internet. Oh, they'd feel this one. Macy practically lives online, her whole persona wrapped up in Instagram stories and TikTok dances. Without Wi-Fi, she'd be a social media ghost. I grinned, picturing her meltdown when she realized her connection to the digital world was about to vanish. And as I worked through each account, I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders. Years of resentment of being used and overlooked slowly dissolving into each keystroke. I shot off a quick message to my lawyer, attaching a spreadsheet I'd kept of every dime I'd funneled into that house over the years. Repairs, upgrades, the works. I added a simple question. What are my options here? His reply was almost instant. More than you'd think. Let's talk. I closed my laptop, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. Real, tangible power over my own life. I'd been the good son, the dependable one, the walking ATM for too long. They'd taken advantage of my guilt and my sense of obligation, mistaking my kindness for weakness. They'd forgotten one crucial thing. I held the cards, and I was finally ready to play them. I picked up my phone and sent a message to my sister. Just 6 words. Figure it out. I'm done helping. Then I deleted her contact. I stood in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of years slipping from my shoulders. It felt like the first breath after breaking the surface of deep water. Sharp, exhilarating, and full of promise. This was just the beginning. The silence after cutting them off was almost unsettling. I'd grown so used to the constant drain of their demands and the weight of their expectations that the absence felt strange, like the quiet after a long, grinding storm. But that peace didn't last. 2 days after I cut the family phone plan, Macy showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to see her standing there. Hair perfectly styled, for her next TikTok, sunglasses perched on her head even though it was raining. She pushed past me into the living room without waiting for an invite. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she snapped. Her phone clutched in a manicured hand. "I've been offline for 2 days. 2. My followers think I'm dead or something. My engagement is tanking." I crossed my arms, leaning against the door. "Didn't seem like you cared much about being online when you ditched my kids for some influencer trip." She froze, her eyes narrowing. "That was different. I had commitments. This is my brand, my life, Matt. You just cut me off without warning." I felt the anger rise again, that familiar burn in my gut. Commitments. You mean like the one where you promised to watch my kids when I was in the hospital? The same kids you left alone, scared and sick. Macy rolled her eyes, tossing her hair over one shoulder. Oh, get over it. They survived, didn't they? Kids bounced back. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep my cool. She had no idea how close I was to losing it. I pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer to her, lowering my voice. You left a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old alone overnight, Macy. That's not something you just brush off. And for the record, I'm done being your safety net. You want Wi-Fi? Pay for it. You want a phone? Get your own plan. She let out a bitter laugh, looking around my modest living room like it was beneath her. You're just being petty. This is about control, isn't it? You just can't stand that I'm doing something with my life, that people actually like me. I felt a cold, sharp calm settle over me. I'd spent years walking on eggshells around my family, trying not to rock the boat, trying to keep the peace for the sake of the kids. But that was over. Macy, this isn't about you being popular or whatever fantasy you've got in your head, I said, my voice steady. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you've been freeloading off me for years, using my money to play influencer while I bust my ass just to keep my kids safe and fed. You want to act like you're some independent boss chick, then start acting like one. She opened her mouth to fire back, but I cut her off. And before you try and guilt-trip me about family, just remember you're the one who left my kids to fend for themselves while you partied in Florida. So don't you dare come in here and lecture me about loyalty. Macy's face went red, her perfectly glossed lips tightening into a thin line. She took a step back, glaring at me like I'd just slapped her. For a second, I thought she might actually cry. Instead, she turned on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, the echo of the door still vibrating through the apartment. I felt something break loose inside me, like a final chain snapping. I'd always been the one to back down, to apologize, to make things right for the sake of keeping the peace. Not anymore. I walked back to my laptop, pulling up the spreadsheet I'd sent to my lawyer. It was time to take the next step. If they wanted a wake-up call, I was more than happy to deliver it. A few clicks later, I'd set the wheels in motion. Formal eviction papers for my dad and stepmom. I'd bought the family house to keep a part of my mom's memory alive, but they'd turned it into a monument to their own entitlement. I wasn't going to let them keep living in my house rent-free while treating me like a doormat. I hit send, leaning back in my chair as a wave of relief washed over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my dignity. Just as I was about to close my laptop, a new email pinged in my inbox, my lawyer replying to the eviction notice. Documents filed, they have 60 days. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and exhaled. The fight had just begun, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the winning side. 2 days after Macy's storm out, my phone lit up again, this time with a call from my dad. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but I knew that would only drag this out. I sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter, and swiped to answer. What's this I hear about you cutting the power to the house? His voice came through sharp, each word a tightly wound coil of frustration. I took a deep breath, keeping my tone level. I'm not cutting the power. I'm just no longer paying for it. Silence. For a moment, I imagined his face turning that familiar shade of red, the vein in his forehead pulsing like it always did when I was a kid and didn't fall in line. So you're punishing us because you're mad at your sister? He shot back, his voice rising. Is this how you handle things now? You throw a tantrum and pull the rug out from under your own family. I felt a spark of old familiar anger flare up, but I forced it down. I wasn't the teenager cowering in his shadow anymore. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm just done being taken advantage of. I'm done footing the bill for people who treat me like a second-class citizen in my own family. You want electricity, water, Wi-Fi, you pay for it. Another pause, this one longer. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to find a way to twist this back on me. After everything we've done for you, he finally said, his tone dropping into that disappointed father register he'd perfected over the years. We took you in when your ex walked out. We gave you a place to land. I actually laughed at that. You mean the apartment I paid for while you and Karen lived in the family house rent-free because I felt too guilty to charge you? The same house I pay the mortgage on, the taxes on, the maintenance on. His silence was deafening. I pressed on, the words spilling out before I could second-guess them. You never took me in, Dad. I bailed you out. You've been living in Mom's house for almost a decade without paying a dime, and I let it slide because I wanted to believe we were still a family, but we're not. Not really. You've made that clear. For a moment, I thought he might hang up, but then I heard a low, bitter chuckle. "Wow," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You really are your mother's son. Always acting like you're better than everyone else. Always throwing money around like it makes you superior." I gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the old familiar rage bubbling up. The same rage I'd felt when he remarried less than a year after Mom died, when he let Karen tear down her garden to put in a hot tub, when he let Macy paint over the height marks Mom had kept on the kitchen door frame. "I'm done being your doormat, Dad," I said, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall I was building between us. "You have 60 days to find somewhere else to live. I'm done funding your lifestyle." I hung up before he could respond, my hand shaking slightly as I set the phone down. I'd never spoken to him like that before, never laid it all out so bluntly. It felt good. Terrifying, but good. The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls and voicemails from Karen. I didn't bother listening to them. I already knew what they would say. Accusations, guilt trips, thinly veiled threats. Instead, I focused on the task at hand. I called my lawyer again, finalizing the paperwork for the eviction. He assured me everything was in place, that they had no legal grounds to contest it. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Later that afternoon, I got a text from my Uncle Rob. Unlike the rest of my family, Rob had always been solid, the one person who'd shown up for me after my ex left. He'd helped me move into my apartment, brought groceries when I couldn't afford much more than ramen, and babysat the kids when I was scrambling to find a new job. "Hey, heard about the family drama. You okay?" I stared at the screen for a moment, the anger from my earlier conversation still simmering just beneath the surface. I typed back a quick reply. "I'm fine, just cutting off some dead weight." He replied almost immediately. "About time. Let me know if you need anything. Proud of you, kid." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Someone in my family finally had my back on. That night, as I sat on the couch with Mia and Alex watching them giggle at some cartoon, I felt a strange, unfamiliar sense of peace. Like I'd finally taken the first real step towards something better. A life that didn't revolve around tiptoeing around my father's ego or cleaning up after my sister's selfish choices. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. And that, more than anything, felt like a win. I expected the backlash to hit quickly, but the sheer speed and intensity of it still took me by surprise. It started with a text from my cousin Zoe, the family's unofficial gossip network. "Yo, what the hell did you do? Dad just told me you're kicking them out of the house. Is that true?" I sighed, rubbing my temples as I sat in my car outside Mia's school waiting for her to come out. I could already feel the headache forming. "Yeah, it's true." Her reply came fast. "Damn, they're losing it. Karen's saying you blindsided them, that you're having a mental breakdown or something." I actually laughed at that. Of course they'd spin it like I was the villain, like I hadn't been carrying their weight for years. I typed back, "If cutting them off after a decade of freeloading counts as a breakdown, then yeah, I guess I'm losing it." I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes for a moment. I could already picture the scene at the family house. Karen probably pacing around in her expensive yoga pants, ranting about how unfair this was, while my dad sulked in his armchair, stewing in quiet, simmering rage. I picked up Mia from school, her backpack bouncing against her small frame as she ran to the car. She climbed in, chattering excitedly about her art project, and I forced myself to focus, to be present. My kids didn't need to carry my stress. As we pulled into our apartment complex, I noticed a familiar car parked near the entrance. A sleek silver SUV that I recognized immediately. Karen, of course. Mia noticed too, her chatter trailing off as we got closer. She frowned, twisting in her seat to look up at me. "Is that Grandma Karen?" I forced a smile, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah, looks like it. Why don't you and Alex head upstairs? I'll handle this." She nodded, a little uncertain, but grabbed her backpack and hopped out of the car. I watched her and Alex disappear up the stairs before I turned back to the SUV, my jaw tightening. Karen stepped out, her expression a mix of fury and faux concern. She was dressed like she'd just come from a Pilates class, perfectly coordinated, not a hair out of place. She marched over, the sharp click of her heels echoing off the concrete. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she snapped, crossing her arms as she stopped a few feet from me. I leaned against my car, folding my arms to match her stance. "I'm done being your bank account, if that's what you mean." She scoffed, tossing her hair over one shoulder. "You're overreacting. This is family. You don't just cut off family." "What's gotten into you?" I felt a bitter smile tug at my lips. Funny, that's exactly what I've been asking myself for the past few years. What kind of family leaves a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old alone for days while they party in Florida? Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty breaking through her anger. She hadn't expected me to push back. She was so used to me rolling over to me, playing the role of the apologetic, financially supportive son. "Don't be dramatic," she snapped, her voice rising. "Macy made a mistake. She's young. She didn't know any better." I felt my jaw clench. She's 28, Karen, not a teenager, and she knew exactly what she was doing when she bailed on my kids. I'm done making excuses for her. I'm done making excuses for all of you. Karen's face flushed a deep, blotchy red, her perfectly composed facade cracking at the edges. "You can't just cut us off, Matt. We're family. We've been there for you." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the years of resentment bubble up sharp and bitter in my chest. "No, you haven't. You've taken from me. You've used me. You've lived in my house on my dime and treated me like a stranger. That ends now." She stepped back, blinking rapidly like she couldn't quite process the words coming out of my mouth. She opened her mouth to fire back, but I cut her off. 60 days, I said, my voice low but firm. "That's all you've got left. After that, you're out." For a moment, we just stood there, the tension crackling between us like static. Finally, she let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "You're going to regret this, Matt. When you're old and alone, when your kids have left you, you're going to remember this moment and realize what a mistake you made." I met her glare head-on, feeling a strange, exhilarating calm wash over me. "I'll take my chances." Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, slamming the door so hard the SUV rocked on its wheels. I stood there for a long moment watching as she peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing against the pavement. As the sound of her engine faded into the distance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A lightness, a freedom that tasted sharp and clean in the back of my throat. I turned, walking slowly up the stairs to my apartment. The kids were already inside, their laughter spilling through the door. I paused for a moment before stepping inside, taking one last deep breath of the cool evening air. I had no idea what kind of backlash was coming my way, but for the first time in years, I felt ready for it. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of missed calls and texts from my dad. He'd finally realized I wasn't bluffing, and his messages made that painfully clear. "You can't just kick us out. This is still my house. We'll fight this, you'll see." I deleted each one without replying. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of a back and forth. Instead, I focused on the next phase of my plan. I called my lawyer again, double-checking the eviction process. I wanted to make sure there were no loose ends they could exploit. He assured me everything was airtight. They had 60 days to pack up and leave, or I'd have the sheriff escort them off the property. I hung up, feeling a sharp, satisfying click in my chest, like the last piece of a long, broken puzzle sliding into place. I'd spent years being the good son, the reliable one, the one who always cleaned up the messes and made the sacrifices. Now, for the first time, I was putting myself and my kids first. Later that day, I got a call from my Uncle Rob. He never minced words, and I braced myself for the scolding I half expected. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Heard about the eviction. You doing okay?" I let out a long breath. "Yeah. Actually, I think I'm better than I've been in a long time." Rob chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that reminded me of the bonfires he used to build at family cookouts. "Good. About time you stood up for yourself. I've been telling you for years, you can't let them walk all over you." I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Yeah, well, I finally got the message." He paused for a moment, his tone shifting. "Just be ready for the fallout. They're going to spin this however they can, probably already playing the victims to anyone who will listen." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Yeah, I figured. But I'm past caring what they think." "Good," he said, his voice firm. "Because if they call me, I'm telling them the same thing. You did the right thing, and they need to figure their own lives out." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a rare sense of support from within my own family. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until just then. "Thanks, Rob," I said, my voice a little rougher than I intended. "No problem, kid. Call me if you need anything." I hung up, feeling a strange, buoyant sense of relief. Maybe this wasn't going to be as lonely as I'd feared. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table helping Mia with her math homework, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my cousin Zoe. "Heads up. Macy just went live on Instagram. She's blasting you, calling you a deadbeat and a bully. Thought you'd want to know." I rolled my eyes. Of course Macy would try to weaponize her followers against me. She'd always been good at playing the victim, at spinning a sob story that made her look like the misunderstood, put-upon princess. For a brief second, I considered logging in to watch the train wreck firsthand, but I stopped myself. That's exactly what she wanted. To drag me into a public spat, to make this messy and dramatic so she could milk it for followers and sympathy. Instead, I typed back a quick response. Letter. I'm done caring. I set the phone down, turning my focus back to Mia, who was watching me with those wide, curious eyes. She chewed on the end of her pencil, clearly picking up on the tension. "Daddy," she asked, her voice small, "is Aunt Macy mad at you?" I forced a smile, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "Don't worry about it, kiddo. Grown-up stuff. You just focus on getting these fractions right, okay?" She nodded, her brow furrowing, as she bent back over her worksheet, her little hand moving the pencil across the paper with fierce concentration. I watched her for a moment, a wave of fierce, protective love tightening my throat. I'd done the right thing. I knew that. I just hoped my kids wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. That night, after the kids were in bed, I finally pulled up Instagram and checked Macy's feed. I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. Sure enough, there it was. A 15-minute live rant complete with fake tears and dramatic pauses. She'd framed the whole thing as a betrayal, painting me as the ungrateful, bitter brother who'd turned on his family out of pure spite. The comments were a mix of sympathy and outrage, her followers eating up every word. "Can't believe your own brother would do this. Family is supposed to stick together. He's probably just jealous of your success." I felt my jaw tighten, my hand clenching into a fist. I closed the app and set my phone down, forcing myself to breathe. She could say whatever she wanted. Let her spin her little web of lies. I wasn't going to be pulled into her drama. I had bigger things to focus on: my kids, my peace, my future. I glanced down the hallway to their rooms, the soft glow of their nightlights spilling into the darkened hall. Yeah, I thought, leaning back in my chair. I'd made the right call. The next few weeks were quieter than I expected. I'd half expected my phone to be blowing up with angry calls and guilt-tripping texts, but after the initial storm, things fell strangely silent. It felt like the uneasy calm before a storm, and I found myself bracing for the other shoe to drop. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, it did. I was sitting in my office catching up on some overdue paperwork when my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer. "Hey, Matt," he said, his tone more serious than usual. "Got some news for you. Your father's contesting the eviction." I felt my jaw tighten, the old familiar anger flaring up in my chest. "On what grounds?" He sighed. "He's claiming it's his house, that you're just a tenant who has no right to evict him." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. Of course he'd try this. It was exactly the kind of desperate last-minute maneuver I should have seen coming. "Can he even do that?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Not successfully," my lawyer replied, a hint of a chuckle slipping through. "The deed is in your name, the mortgage is in your name, and you've got a paper trail a mile long proving you've paid every bill for the past decade. He's just trying to buy time, hoping you'll back down." I let out a slow breath, the tension in my shoulders easing a little. "All right, what's the next step?" "I've already filed the response," he said, his tone shifting to a more businesslike clip. "Should be wrapped up within the next couple of weeks. I'll keep you posted." I thanked him and hung up, feeling the anger simmer in my gut. It wasn't enough that they'd leached off me for years. Now they were trying to take the one piece of my mom's legacy I'd fought so hard to hold on to. I stood up, pacing the small space of my home office, my mind racing. I wasn't going to let them win, not this time. That weekend, I drove by the family house. I hadn't been there in over a year, and as I pulled up to the curb, I felt a strange mix of nostalgia and bitterness. The house looked the same. Neatly trimmed hedges, the porch swing creaking slightly in the wind, the same faded shutters my mom had painted herself. I parked and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Memories flooded back. Birthdays, holiday dinners, late-night talks with my mom in the kitchen over cups of tea. But those memories had been tainted, twisted by years of resentment and manipulation. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a building. 4 walls and a roof. I got out and walked up the driveway, feeling the cold wind bite at my skin. I knocked on the door, and after a few seconds, my dad opened it. He looked older, his face drawn and pale. His shoulders stooped like the weight of the years had finally caught up to him. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence stretching thin and sharp between us. "Matt?" he said, his voice rough. "Didn't expect to see you here." I forced a thin, tight smile. "Just wanted to make sure you got my lawyer's notice." He stiffened, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, I got it. You really going to go through with this, kick your own father out of his house?" I felt a flash of anger, but I forced it down, keeping my tone calm. "It's not your house. It's mine. Always has been." I just finally realized it. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off, my voice hardening. "You want to take this to court? Fine. But just remember, I've got every receipt, every bank statement, every mortgage payment on my side. You can drag this out if you want, but in the end, you're still going to lose." He said nothing, his eyes narrowing, his lips pressing into a thin, bloodless line. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold, clean air fill my lungs. 60 days, I said, my voice dropping into a quiet final tone. That's all you've got left. I turned on my heel and walked back to my car, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back as I pulled out of the driveway, the house growing smaller in my rearview mirror. 2 weeks later, the court ruled in my favor. My dad's challenge was thrown out, his desperate claims of ownership dismissed without a second thought. I got the final paperwork in the mail a few days later. The official notice that my eviction order was upheld, that my father and Karen had exactly 30 days to vacate the property. I set the papers down on my kitchen table, staring at them for a long moment, the weight of it all settling on my shoulders. I'd won. I'd finally taken back my life, my peace, my freedom. That evening, I took Mia and Alex out for ice cream. We sat on a bench overlooking the park, the late summer sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As I watched my kids laugh and chase each other around the swings, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of peace settle in my chest. I'd done the right thing. I'd put my family first, my real family, the one I'd built for myself, the one that truly mattered. As the sun dipped below the trees, I leaned back, my hands resting on the cool, worn wood of the bench, and closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the fading sunlight wash over me. I was free. Story 2. You won't have it if I can't have it. When I declined to allow my brother to co-own my restaurant, he threatened. He set it on fire 9 days later. So I exacted my final retribution. Hello everyone, prior to the start of today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Okay, Reddit. My family surprised me by asking my unemployed brother to become a co-owner of my restaurant. When I declined, my father shouted and tossed his drink at me. Be mindful of your tone. In front of this family, you won't treat me disrespectfully. That was the day I permanently severed my links. Naturally, though, they weren't finished. This is how it transpired. I'm a 30-year-old man who has spent the last 8 years working in finance. My modest home on the south side of Kansas City is a fine location to live, and I paid $100,000 for it out of my own pocket. Years of working 60-hour weeks and meticulous planning allowed me to earn every dime. The dynamics in our home were quite evident while I was growing up. The golden kid was a 26-year-old man named Blake, and I was just 4 years younger than him. To my parents, Blake could do no wrong. Had a PhD in mathematics. The instructor is working against him. Resigned from his third position in 6 months. The atmosphere at work wasn't encouraging. In the meantime, I was constantly watched. You must be more responsible. Be a better role model. Elderly brothers do that. I could repeat that garbage in my sleep since I heard it so often. The problem is that it felt fine, so I didn't become accustomed to it. I grew accustomed to it since I discovered early on that I would be less disappointed if I had lower expectations of my parents. It was a matter of survival. My time in high school was really difficult. My parents did not attend my academic decathlon state finals when I finished in second place, but Blake received a lot of acclaim for making it to JV basketball. The excuse was that Blake had to be taken to his game by someone. I received the silver medal when I returned home. I ended up keeping the medal in my desk drawer. Never brought up again. While Blake had a free ride to Mizzou from my parents, I worked 2 jobs to pay for my own tuition at Missouri State. As a graduation present, they even got him a brand new Civic. Me. We anticipate big things from you, and I received a solid handshake. Talk. I never felt seen in that house except for one individual, my granddad. Despite his lack of feeling and affection, he demonstrated love in meaningful ways. There was always a cup of black coffee waiting for me when I came in. Candy is unnecessary for a child like you. He would advise you to maintain your acuity. When I couldn't afford to replace my computer after it died at my first job, when I contacted the next day to thank him, a little sum of money showed up in my account. It's from my savings, he merely stated. Just enough to save you from having to fight alone. It was never a huge thing to him. I never forgot it, but I never brought it up again. After serving in the military during World War II, my grandpa spent 40 years as a machinist. Fair, yet as hard as nails. He showed me how to properly invest, fix a leaking faucet, and change my own oil. He told me to never depend on anybody else to help you construct your life. He attended all of my high school, college, and even financial certification ceremonies as we worked on his vintage Chevy in the garage. Every time Dad would give me a card that had a $100 dollar and a simple message that said, "Proud of you." Brief. Easy. However, it was crucial. My granddad died 2 years ago. The only member of my family who ever appreciated me for who I was passed away. We met at Attorney Gavin's office for the will reading around a month following the funeral. My grandfather had carefully separated everything. My parents each received $100,000 and Blake and I each received $200,000. Blake and I would share 50-50 ownership of the home where my parents and Blake resided. The lawyer gave a clear explanation of my grandfather's logic. Because Blake has always been given preference by your parents, he could not rely on them to administer the estate in a fair manner. He was afraid Rowan would have nothing if he left everything in their hands. It was amazing to see the expressions on my parents' faces. My father's face became a striking shade of scarlet while my mother's jaw literally hung open. Unable to look into anyone's eyes, Blake simply gazed at his sneakers. It found out that only a few months before to his passing, my grandfather had sold his own home for $600,000. That was the source of the funds. He had meticulously prepared everything to make sure I wouldn't be left in the dark when he left. I knew right away what I intended to do with the $200,000 when I put money into my account. I learned from working in finance that idle money quickly loses value. I thus made the decision to create a restaurant because rather than because I had a strong desire to cook, I thought it would be a wise investment that, with the right management, might bring in a consistent flow of revenue. I completed my assignment. I saw a need for high-end comfort cuisine in the Crossroads neighborhood after 3 months of study into the Kansas City restaurant industry. In addition to having reasonable foot traffic and rent, the site was close enough to the commercial district to draw in lunchgoers. In order to start the business, I invested around $180,000. I encountered Marcel, a seasoned chef, through a client, and I hired him. He was incredible. After receiving his training in New Orleans and working at a few upscale establishments, he desired a smaller setting where he could exercise more creative control. The eatery become both my business and his kitchen. I kept working at my day job. While I hired a manager I trusted to run front-of-house operations, I continued to perform my financial employment. I invited everyone, including Blake and my parents, when the restaurant debuted a month later. Perhaps I reasoned they would be proud of my accomplishments at last. We had a full schedule for the first 2 weekends, and the establishment was immediately receiving good feedback from the community. Rather, in the midst of the festivities, my mother leaned over and remarked, "You ought to have collaborated with Blake on this." That's exactly what he's always wanted, to run a restaurant, as though my brother had somehow lost out on my accomplishment. Blake acted as like he owned the establishment the whole opening night, directing the waitstaff how to do their duties, scolding the menu in front of Marcel, and loudly declaring that he was providing business advice. I grinned and remained silent. I was accustomed to it. The first half of the year was terrible. From 7 to 4, I worked in finance, and until midnight I went directly to the restaurant. Dealing with everything from personnel concerns to supplier issues took up the whole weekend at the restaurant. It was worthwhile, even though I didn't take a day off for over 4 months. By the 8th month, we were receiving consistent business, receiving good reviews across the board, and even being included in the local newspaper as one of the top 10 new eateries in KC. I was creating something I could genuinely be proud of, and the company was making money sooner than I had anticipated. Blake spent less than a year spending $200,000 on parties, VIP tables, renting sports vehicles, and burning away his fortune while I was starting a business. I learned about it via friends and social media posts that boasted about his high life and included images of him popping bottles at parties. His Instagram became a repository of bad financial choices. He would post about his new $5,000 watch one week and then another. He smashed the tables on a weekend trip to Vegas. The next week, he was posing as though he had a leased Lamborghini. Finding out that he had been telling everyone the restaurant was a family business only made things worse. He even identified himself as the owner and invited possible business partners to supper. Later, Marcel informed me that Blake had given suppliers his personal card, stating that he was in charge of all the purchase choices. I was brought aside by my bar manager one evening, who gave me a credit card statement that had a $700 bill on it, which Blake had attempted to claim as owner expenditures. Blake just answered, "What's the big deal?" and shrugged when questioned. "We are related. All of the funds remain in the same pot." Then he conceived with his girlfriend. It seems that Camilla, the girl, believed Blake to be a prosperous businessman. He informed her about this. When she discovered he was destitute and jobless, reality struck her hard. Blake continued to act entitled despite everything. The pregnancy, if anything, further increased his desire to take over my company. I was somewhere at the center of the actual family turmoil when it began. My mother contacted me on a Saturday morning almost a year ago, inviting me to attend a significant family event. About 20 people, largely from my mom's side, were crammed inside the house when I got there. It was clear from the setting that they were planning an intervention, but it wasn't the typical type. 2 vacant seats in the living room have been moved to face the sofa, presumably one for me and one beside my mom. Like a tribunal, the remainder of the family sat in a semicircle. Observing me with the same judgmental gaze I had been used to growing up, my father stood by the hearth with his arms folded. Among the well-known faces, I saw 2 new men seated next to Blake, my cousin Jake, whom I hadn't seen in years, and his closest buddy Troy, a man with sleeve tattoos and a shaved head who had been in and out of jail for petty larceny. It seems that he had been staying at my parents' house for several months. After 10 minutes, my mother got up and declared that Camilla was 3 months along with her pregnancy. The wedding was scheduled for the following month. I whispered a brief congrats to Blake as everyone cheered. Before my mother even said it, I could tell what was going to happen from the fake smiles that filled the room. Aunt Debbie continued to look expectantly between Blake and me. Uncle Tim was looking at his watch anxiously. I hadn't seen my cousin Karen in 3 years, but she suddenly seemed very interested in family matters. My mom wasn't finished, though. She turned to face me as she stood up once again. "There will soon be a new member of our family. I know that starting a family is difficult, especially since Blake still lacks a steady job, but Blake and Camilla are embarking on a new journey." Then she gave me a direct look and revealed the truth. "I know you've put in a lot of work, Rowan. I genuinely admire all that you have achieved. However, I want you to think more broadly today. Consider your brother. Consider the child that will soon enter your life." And there it was. "I think you should make Blake a co-owner of your restaurant. After all, he needs a steady income, and family businesses should stay in the family. He deserves an equal share without having to put in any money." I could hear relatives nodding in agreement. One even said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's right. Rowan's the older brother. He should take care of his own." The room felt like it was closing in. They weren't just waiting for my answer. They expected me to say yes, like it was already decided. I sat there for a full minute staring at my glass. Then I looked up at my mother and said, "Are you serious? That restaurant is something I built with everything I had. I put $180,000 into it. I work 80-hour weeks managing it. And now you're telling me I should just hand over half to Blake for nothing? I'm never going to agree to that," she fired back immediately, her voice dripping with entitlement. "Rowan, your brother is unemployed and about to become a father. We are related. It wouldn't even affect you to share. You're being utterly selfish. Can you let your nephew be born without someone caring for him?" I stood up, not worrying about the relatives staring. "Then where's the $200,000 he inherited from Grandpa Blake?" rushed in with a prearranged retort. His voice smooth with practiced innocence. "I invested it with a buddy, but the deal went through and I lost everything." I couldn't help but chuckle. "You're lying. You spent it all partying over the past year. Don't think I didn't know. Should I show everyone the photographs of you flinging money around at strip clubs? Or the invoices from the 3 motorcycles you bought and crashed?" Blake instantly dropped his head, but not before I glimpsed the flicker of anger in his eyes. Troy leaned over and muttered something to him while gazing at me before anyone could cut in. I turned to my parents. "I'm not making him co-owner of my restaurant. While he was busy pissing away his money, I worked hard to build that business. Give me $200,000 for his portion if you really want it. He'll become a buddy of mine. You are free to do as you like. Hand it over to Blake. Give it to his child." "I don't give a damn." My father leaped to his feet, snatched up his drink, and hurled it in my face. "Be mindful of your tone. You still have me as your dad. Furthermore, you will not treat me disrespectfully in front of this family." Debbie gasped when the room fell quiet. Even Blake appeared astonished and Karen covered her mouth. I quietly picked up my coat, wiped my face with my sleeve, and proceeded to the door. "I appreciate you reminding me of my place in this family," I remarked, giving them all one more glance before leaving. I drove quietly home. My phone was constantly buzzing with calls and texts from different family members, some of whom were apologizing and others emphasizing the need of helping Blake. After the family get-together, I spent 2 weeks ignoring everyone. My parents kept calling and texting me. My mother would go on guilt trips one after the other. I didn't bring you up to be that egotistical and pretentious. All we're attempting to do is assist your brother in starting a family. My father was more straightforward. This is something you owe your brother. After the first week, I blocked their phones, but they began to appear at the restaurant and at my residence. During dinner service one evening, Blake and Troy barged in and made a big deal out of informing patrons that I was robbing my own family and that the restaurant should be half his. They had to be escorted out for me. The employees began to feel anxious. After Blake arrived one evening and threatened to fire her once he took over, my host resigned. To avoid his visits, 2 servers asked for separate schedules. Although Marcel refused to back down, I could see that the ongoing turmoil was getting to him. I spoke with a lawyer about obtaining a restraining order, but he advised me that it would be challenging to enforce in the absence of any threats of violence. I had brought a cease and desist letter to my parents' house, which was the best they could provide. When my mother arrived at my office building 3 days later, she caused such a commotion in the lobby that security had to remove her out. That afternoon, I received a call from my employer who was worried about how personal matters were influencing my work environment. I promised him that it wouldn't happen again, but I could see that things had become worse a week or so before to the fire. Marcel stormed in as I was in the back office taking inventory. Blake and the hostess are arguing outside. He is insisting on being seated at a table that has been reserved. When I left, I discovered Blake getting in the way of our 22-year-old hostess while high as a kite. "Leave now." "You're no longer welcome here," I said. "You're screwed." He made a slur. "I should be here." "Dad was correct about you. You have always been a self-centered jerk." I spoke with a level tone. "I'll call the police if you don't leave now." He rushed at me at that moment. Plates and glasses shattered on the floor as we slammed into a table. As we battled, customers scurried away. Despite being intoxicated, Blake was still able to strike me in the jaw. I pinned his arms and wrestled him to the ground. "Do you believe that you are superior to me?" He spit. "You've always done so." "I'll show you, though. If you tamper with me, you'll see what happens." As they hauled him out, security tore us apart. Blake yelled, "You won't have it if I can't have it. Do you hear me?" That evening, I reported the attack and the threat to the police. While taking witness accounts, the cops clarified that they could only arrest him with simple assault and trespassing in the absence of additional proof of a real arson scheme. The next morning, Blake was freed on bond. Then there was silence. Blake was not to be seen for a whole week. No threats, no calls, not a show. Began to reflect. After viewing the police report, he may have backed off. Perhaps he had finally come to the realization that he couldn't use fear to get what he desired. I ought to have been more aware. The establishment saw immediate repercussions. After learning of the fight, a number of bookings were canceled. Yelp reviews began to surface that mentioned the awkward family turmoil. To stand at the door during work hours, I had to employ a security guard. A cost I hadn't planned for. Around 2 in the morning, 9 days later, Marcel called me in a panic. "The eatery is ablaze. The security firm called me just now. Now there's the fire department." I hurried across town, racing every red light from 3 blocks away after throwing on some clothing. The orange glow against the night sky was visible to me. By the time I arrived, fire vehicles had closed off the street, their lights blazing over the faces of the people who had gathered to watch. My restaurant was on fire when I hurried over. Despite the firemen's best efforts, it was obvious that there would be significant damage. I watched as all I had created was destroyed by fire. As daylight dawned, I was contacted by the fire chief. "Unfortunately, there isn't much left inside, but we have it controlled." "Do you have any clue how it began?" I informed him about Blake's danger. "The police report." I said, "I know it was him, but I can't prove it." Blake's threat and the altercation at the restaurant were among the things I mentioned in my statement to the police and fire investigators the next morning. Investigator Reynolds. A female investigator assigned to the investigation made thorough notes regarding the previous family dispute. "We'll do a thorough investigation," she stated. "However, arson cases sometimes take months to develop due to their complexity. Beyond a reasonable doubt, we must prove not just that it was arson, but also who committed it." I contacted Blake once I got out of the police station. The third ring caught his attention. "Hello, my friend. What is going on?" He spoke in an informal tone as if we were just getting acquainted. "You are well aware of the situation. I have no idea what you're discussing." The smirk was almost audible over the phone. "Last night the restaurant caught fire." A pause. "Shitty. That's awful. Insurance? Put a lid on it." "Blake, stop the nonsense. I spent the entire night at home. Ask Troy." He fell into my couch. One more pause. "It may have been electrical. You know the wiring in those ancient buildings breaks? This is something you will regret." He laughed. "What do you regret sleeping at home while your investment was lost? I wish you luck in demonstrating otherwise." I knew two things when I hung up. Without a doubt, he did. He also believed that he was untouchable. That would be his error. The fire investigation team gathered evidence, examined burn patterns, and collected samples from the scene. They formally categorized it as arson 3 weeks later. The rear door had been smashed into, and an accelerant had been utilized in many places. They missed one of the security cameras which had been turned off. Marcel had put up a new camera to keep an eye on food delivery in the kitchen. There were 2 males in the poor quality video. One had the appearance of Troy and the other Blake. They were lighting a match after painstakingly dumping stuff on the counters and flooring. Their faces nevertheless were too blurry for a reliable identification. Dealing with insurance adjusters, consoling displaced workers, and answering incessant queries from suppliers and customers kept me in a trance for the next 3 weeks. It had a serious financial impact. Even though I had insurance, there was a hefty deductible, and for the next 3 months the coverage for business disruption was limited. The inquiry went on. Every week, sometimes every day, I got in touch with Detective Reynolds. They were doing rigorous case-building, questioning possible witnesses, and monitoring mobile phone tower data. Since arson cases automatically result in fraud evaluations, my insurance company also dispatched its own investigators who required copious evidence. My parents unexpectedly visited my home around 2 months into the probe. I was going over paperwork for the insurance company on a Sunday morning. They stood there as if they hadn't slept in days as I opened the door. "Blake has to be discussed." As she pushed by me into the living room, my mother spoke. My dad followed, his expression stern. "Yesterday, the police visited our home to inquire about Blake's whereabouts on the night of the fire." I stood with my arms folded and shut the door. "How would you like me to handle that?" The voice of my mother broke. "He's being treated like a criminal by them. Rowan, even if he may have erred, he is still your brother." An error. What I was hearing was unbelievable. He set my business on fire. Every employee's livelihood was devastated by him. It's not an error. It's a crime. "Son," my father came forward. "We want the charges to be dropped. Inform the authorities that you do not wish to pursue this. Blake might spend a lot of time behind bars." "Excellent." Flatly, I replied. "He ought to be." My mom broke down in tears. "How come you're so icy? Where is your family? Are you indifferent to the harm this is causing us? Your father has extremely high blood pressure. I have trouble falling asleep. And who is to blame for that?" "Did this not happen to me?" I asked Blake. My dad yelled, "If only you had been there for him when he needed you." "Just stop there," I interrupted him. "You're not allowed to put this on me. Blake made his own decisions as an adult. You are too. You've tolerated his actions all of his life, so you're shocked when he burns down a building because he didn't get his way." My mom took hold of my arm. "Rowan, please aid your brother right now if you ever love this family. He is expecting a child. If your father is incarcerated, do you want your niece or nephew to grow up with him?" I moved away from her. Before committing arson, Blake ought to have considered it. "He's always made you jealous," my dad said in a chilly tone. "Isn't this your opportunity to finally ruin him?" I approached and held open the door. "You ought to go, in my opinion. You would make your granddad feel embarrassed." As they left, my mother spoke. "You weren't brought up to ignore your family by him, no?" I answered. "He taught me to advocate for myself. Something I never learned from you." I sat at my kitchen table and gazed at the wall for a while after they had departed. What I already knew was validated by their presence. Regardless of what Blake accomplished, they would always pick him above me. They saw me as the villain since I didn't give up my life to protect him from the repercussions. Unexpectedly, 4 months after the fire, a breakthrough was made. 2 streets away from the eatery, the proprietor of a gas station came forward with pristine video footage. In plain sight, Blake and Troy had used credit cards bearing their identities to buy and fill 2 gas cans 1 hour prior to the incident. Blake's texts detailing the scheme were discovered by the police when they carried out search warrants at their homes. He cannot have half of the restaurant if I cannot. Additionally, they found garments that had accelerant residues similar to those used in the fire. Almost 5 months after the fire, Blake and Troy were taken into custody when the district attorney's office filed official charges. Second-degree arson, conspiracy, criminal mischief, and insurance fraud were among the allegations. In exchange for less charges, Troy immediately began negotiating a plea agreement to testify against Blake. Detective Reynolds phoned to inform me that they were in custody while I was at work. Blake was going to pay the price at last. I traveled to the county prison where Blake was being held the day following his arrest. When they took him into the visitor's room, I had to see his face. He had a trashy appearance, wearing an orange jumpsuit, unshaven, and with bloodshot eyes. However, he smiled at me right away. He leaned back in his chair and murmured, "Big brother, come save me." I simply gazed at him. Why, it was more than simply my restaurant. 26 employees relied on it for their livelihood. The smile vanished as he leaned forward. "Because you've always had everything handed to you and you're a selfish jerk. Do you really believe you're that superior to me?" It was presented to me and I nearly laughed. I earned all I own. The person who has had everything handed to him throughout his life is you. You're screwed. He spit. "I might have become your companion. Just one signature. It would have just required that. You had to keep it all for yourself, though. I kept it." Silently, I said, "I used my own funds and labor to construct it. And it's gone now." "Oh," he said, "that smile is coming back. How does that feel?" I got up knowing I had taken it from you. "Blake, you'll spend years behind bars." "Was it worthwhile?" His grin wavered. "My parents will take me out." "They always do." I turned to go. Not now. I met with attorney Gavin after visiting Blake to discuss the house my grandpa had given to Blake and myself. On that front too, it was time to take action. What choices do I have about the property that Blake and I jointly own? I explained the problem and then asked, "Given that you and Blake share ownership of the property," Gavin went over the will once again. "Given Blake's present legal issues, you are entitled to compel a partition sale. This is a good moment. If both owners choose to sell, your parents have no legal right to stay. And how soon can we have this resolved?" Knowing what I was about to do, I asked. Gavin responded, "I can submit the petition today. We might be able to speed up the procedure given the situation. Your parents will probably argue against it, but they won't have much of a case given Blake's legal status." "Do it," I urged. Additionally, Gavin clarified the district attorney's office handles the criminal matter. The state is pursuing the case, but as the victim, you will be expected to testify and submit proof. I would advise you to assist the prosecutors to the fullest. Make sure they know how this incident affected you and your staff during the course of the following several months. That's precisely what I did. I gave the prosecution all the things they need. Financial documents demonstrating my restaurant investment, payroll data from employees to show the impacted livelihoods, as well as thorough descriptions of Blake's threats and prior actions. I even made a thorough chronology of the events that preceded the fire, along with images of Blake's extravagant spending on social media, documents detailing his disturbances at the eatery, as well as eyewitness accounts from staff members he had mistreated. The wheels of justice, meantime, churned slowly. It would take over a year for Blake's case to get to trial. His lawyer said they needed more time to prepare his defense and filed move after motion seeking delays. I was cautioned by the district attorney that this was common practice, particularly when the evidence was overwhelming. While they looked into every facet of the fire to make sure I wasn't involved, I concentrated on rebuilding during this 8-month-long insurance claim procedure. They stated it's standard protocol, but when you're the victim, it's really annoying. I had to submit years' worth of financial data, go through many interviews, and deal with a ton of paperwork. It took 4 months for the house's petition action to be processed by the courts. Naturally, my parents opposed it, arguing that I was experiencing difficulty and attempting to postpone, but the judge finally decided in my favor. Blake and I had to divide the cash from the sale of the house. Blake's portion was placed in a court-managed trust until the criminal case was over because of his incarceration. My parents had to leave the home they had occupied for many years. I had grown up feeling like a second-class citizen in that house. They had to drastically reduce their size. I was not pleased to see the moving trucks. Just a weird feeling of completion. 5 months after the fire, the house sold for $500,000. I received the $250,000 that was my portion right away. As possible compensation for the fire damages, Blake's part was held in escrow while his case was being handled. Camilla gave birth to a child they named Tyler at this time. He was someone I never met. I received photos from my parents with passive-aggressive remarks. "Your nephew. You turn your back on your family by refusing to recognize them." Without reacting to the financial fallout from the fire, I erased them all. Was cruel. I had to take money out of my savings to support some of my suffering employees while I awaited the insurance settlement. As we prepared our return, Marcel remained faithful and declined offers from other eateries. When we rebuilt, I offered him a share in the new business. Blake's trial date finally came about 11 months after the fire. Troy had already agreed to a 3-year plea bargain in exchange for his testimony by that point. The actual trial lasted only 4 days, which was remarkably short. The evidence was overwhelming. Troy's testimony, the text messages, the gas station receipts, the surveillance film, and the forensic evidence from the fire site. On the second day, I testified about the argument at the restaurant, Blake's threats, and the family get-together. Blake's lawyer attempted to portray it as a family dispute, exaggerated, implying that Blake had no real intention of setting the restaurant on fire. Simply frightened me. The jury rejected it. They returned with a guilty decision on all charges after only 6 hours of deliberation. Blake was found guilty of arson and other offenses and given an 8-year jail sentence, after 5 years with the prospect of release. In addition, the judge mandated that he make amends for any losses that his insurance did not cover. He would receive around $150,000 from his portion of the house's sales. Blake gave me a hateful glare as the bailiff escorted him away. My mother sobbed into her hands as my parents sat in the row behind him. My father's countenance was blank as he looked straight ahead. They gave me absolutely no acknowledgement. My mother texted me to ask to meet the day after the sentencing. I concurred. They were sitting at a corner table when I got there. My mom's eyes were puffy and red. My dad appeared to have aged by a decade. "You achieved your goal." As soon as I sat down, my father said, "Are you content now I refused to fall for the ruse?" None of this was what I wanted. Blake made his decisions. My mother's voice broke as she said, 8 years. "Because you were unable to forgive him, our son will spend 8 years in prison." "Pardon him." I shook my head, not believing it. "He set fire to something. He ruined my company." "What were your expectations?" "We thought you would be a brother." My dad leaned across the table and growled. "You had the option to request leniency. You may have explained to the judge that it was only a family conflict. It was more than a family quarrel," I said, maintaining a level voice. "He did a grave offense." I resisted as my mother grabbed for my hand. "He is still your brother, though. You are a human being." "And that's meant to make things okay?" I inquired. "We've had enough of you." With a voice trembling with anger, my father spoke. "I don't have a son. From our perspective, we currently only have one child and he is incarcerated." As I turned to go, I answered, "Perhaps pay him a visit sometimes. He will require all available assistance." I was followed to the door by my mother's voice. "Never get in touch with us again. This family is devastated because of you." I left without turning around. I'm experiencing an odd feeling of relief. 2 weeks after the sentencing, the final connections were severed. The whole amount was eventually made available by the insurance company. $25,000 for inventory loss, $45,000 for business disruption, and $230,000 for the facility and equipment, along with my portion of the selling of the house. I now needed to reconstruct $550,000. It took a while to rebuild the eatery. It took 3 months to find a new site that worked. I chose a location in the River Market District. Better visibility and foot traffic, but more costly. It took an additional 2 months to obtain clearances and licenses. It took 6 months to build and renovate. I kept in touch with my former workers during this process, providing them advances and assisting them in finding temporary employment with the assurance that they would be given their positions back when we reopened. Marcel stayed at my side the whole time. He tested cuisine dishes at pop-up events and assisted in designing the new kitchen. He never once faltered in his dedication to our objective, and we ran to maintain our reputation in the community. I brought on a new general manager who had expertise reviving failing eateries. Derek, a man who had previously worked for several large chains, desired something more intimate. He brought in a group of servers he had previously dealt with and knew would deliver excellent service. Although it cost more, the new location had better parking and visibility. The kitchen infrastructure was already in place because the previous tenant had been a failing gastropub, which saved a lot of money on renovations. I arranged a 5-year lease with a buyout option. In the end, run after hearing my narrative, 3 separate investors approached me despite all that had transpired throughout the restoration. They provided stock in return for capital. I declined each one. I wasn't going to cede any control of my company after Blake's incident, regardless of how alluring the proposition appeared. Our new restaurant eventually opened 18 months after the fire. Larger, more aesthetically pleasing, and situated in a more noticeable area. Better kitchen appliances, a handmade wood-fired grill, a true bar with handcrafted drinks, and a private dining area for parties were all upgrades. Marcel combined Kansas City cuisine with his experience in New Orleans to create a menu. Comfort food that was elevated and in high demand. I had no idea how amazing opening night would be. There is a 2-week waiting and a line out the door for every table. Positive reviews and pictures of meals went viral on social media. Detective Reynolds and her husband entered the dining room as I was making my way around welcoming guests. After I sat them at our nicest table, she added, "I thought you might like an update. I've heard that your parents had to sell their car in order to pay the rent after your brother's appeal was rejected last week." Evidently, Blake's legal defense consumed all of their resources. With no sense of gratification or pity, I nodded. "I appreciate you informing me. Tonight's dinner is free." A table of regulars from the previous location struck up a conversation with me as I went about my rounds. When we announced the reopening, they were among the first to make reservations. "Come back stronger," one of them remarked, lifting his glass. Overhearing everyone in the dining area participated in the toast. I needed a moment to gather myself, so I went into the kitchen. We sold $15,000 that night, which was more than twice as much as we had at the previous site. We had to create a waiting list for weekend reservations by the 3rd month since we were making a steady profit. Marcel firmly shook his hand when I gave him a 15% share in the company. Derek received 5% with performance-based bonuses possible. These choices weren't only astute business choices. They were about assembling a group of people who cared about our achievement. I got a letter from Camilla a year after we reopened. She clarified that she was raising their baby by herself after she and Blake split up while he was incarcerated. She inquired if I would be interested in seeing my nephew and apologized for her part in the family conflict. I haven't made up my mind yet. I still don't have a relationship with my parents. On my birthday and Christmas, they would send me cards generally with guilt-ridden words about forgiveness and family. I don't answer. The eatery is still doing well in the interim. We've hired 3 additional cooks to work under Marcel added lunch service and are thinking about building a second site across town. Everything I had constructed was supposed to be destroyed by the fire, but it made me rebuild something better instead. Marcel later handed out beverages to rise from the ashes after the final patrons had left and the workers had completed cleaning up. "Pouring," he said. As we exchanged glasses, I took at my new restaurant, which was flourishing in spite of all Blake had attempted to ruin. Getting even isn't always the greatest form of retaliation. While they remain mired in the mess they made, it is progressing and thriving.